Good morning. Today is Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. This is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearing. There are 5 cases on the agenda today, and we'll start with the first case. It's an Economic Unit 1704902A as an apple. The property is located at 2025 Fairfax Drive, and Mr. Jonathan Kinney is here to represent the owners. Mr. Kinney, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property, sir.
Thank you. This is a property that we've been before the Board of Equalization before, so I know some of you are familiar with it, others may not be. It's a small property that's part of a larger complex that has different owners, but basically it's a site of less than 20,000 feet. And in our opinion, it's an extremely difficult site to develop, and we've had offers that reflect the fact that it is not consistent with other sites in the area that would bring potentially a higher value. The 2 reasons for that are the underground rock that exists on the site. We've enclosed reports from environmental studies that show the existence of a granite type of rock underneath the structure of the soil that would be affected by the development of an underground garage on the site. The other is the fact that the property is surrounded on 2 sides by an historic Wakefield Manor building, designated historic in the county, one of the essential sites, and any development has to take into consideration protecting those sites with extensive monitoring and extra work involved in that regard. The owner's been trying to sell this site, which is under different ownership than the Wakefield Manor apartments. I know the county treats this as an economic unit, but we've always said that it's hard to treat something as an economic unit when you have different ownerships. But just taking this property by itself, the owners attempted to sell the property for the last 5 years. We've designated or listed in our application the number of offers they've received and the amounts of the offers, none of which have been equal to or higher than the county's assessed value. I've listed in the second page of my written presentation the different offers that have come in, and I'm just going to focus on the last one that came in, which came in November of 2020. That was an offer from the Fortis Group. We were initially rejected the offer, but we were able to, after that time, reach an agreement with Fortis, basically at the $4 million mark, which is less than half of the assessment. And that contract is in force and in play at the present time. And we think that the market sale of the property is the best determination of value. There are, as I said, there are a number of reasons, the geotech and the monitoring involved with the adjoining historic property, that negatively affect the value of this property. We have not had an offer in the last 5 years, and although the property has been on the market, both actively and passively, any equal to the county's assessment, the offers that were the highest, the people who put the offers in pulled out before going firm on the contract because of the situation they found with both the historic provision next door and the underground rock strata that was underneath the property. So in our opinion, the market value, not having any offers equal to the assessment, and where the owner has actually accepted an offer of the $4 million, is really the best example of what the price of the property reflects. So that's our presentation.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bailey for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Similar to what Mr. Kinney said, this case has been before the board several years in a row now, probably going on about 5 years in a row. As we've done in the past, we've valued this property consistently with how we value other site plans that have apartment units approved. We have been provided some LOIs in the past. One that was recently provided in the package stated that there was an offer on the table about $4 million, and Mr. Kinney stated. There was also some information in there about having to provide the garden properties, which he referenced parking spaces in this new development. In the initial LOI, they stated they would deduct $60,000 per parking space in whatever agreement they reach. And later is reflected that there would be 30 parking spaces provided for the apartment complex. So by my math, that's about 1.8 million per, make sure I'm right. Yeah, 1.8 million for 30 parking spaces that they were gonna deduct. There was another LOI provided, dated January 28th of this year for a lower price than what was in the November LOI. But in this one, they didn't make reference to the parking spaces deduction. I think they went ahead and deducted that out when they provided this LOI. And again, we have to value this property based off of existing sales that we have. This property hasn't sold yet, so therefore there is no deduction being made by the county. In the past, we have made deductions for things such as environmental remediation on site plans. That deduction was based off the amount spent for the environmental remediation. Again, this property hasn't sold and no work has been done, so there is no quantifiable deduction for us to place on this property. Last year, the board looked at residential properties that have a 10% outside influence adjustment, and that was the way you all made your decision. Again, that's not how we do it on the commercial side. We use actual sales and actual quantifiable data. So therefore, we confirm the assessment. That's all we have.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, for Mr. Kinney, our package shows the appellant's estimate of value is $6,360,000 even. And can you just clarify, is that the estimate for the one RPC related to the redevelopment site, or the entire property, including the existing apartments?
That's our estimate solely for the single lot.
Okay.
Which is the development site. It currently is like 40 parking spaces.
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey's correct that the contract does provide for replacement of 30. So we added on what we thought was a more than generous value onto the $4 million to cover the parking spaces. If you took the 60,000 in the contract, it would be 5.8. We went a little higher because we were hoping actually to negotiate a slightly better deal, but we weren't able to. So that is our assessment or valuation of the single lot itself. We are not addressing or not appealing anything on either the apartment buildings in that area, either Courthouse Manor or Wakefield Manor.
Okay.
Mr. Matzkin.
I too have a question for the appellant. On this one site, you talk about building constraints, the underlying rock, as an example, and some other constraints. If you or me or anybody wanted to develop it right now, forgetting about money or cost or assessment, could you build out to the extent that the site plan zoning permits that much density, that many parking spaces?
If you provided the parking required, there's probably no reason you couldn't build out. It's the cost factor of building out on a small site and the underground rock on the site. But we haven't built it, and a number of the people who have come in have shown fewer units, but I don't know the next developer could show extra units, but we've always assumed that 104 units could potentially be built there, but some of the people who have submitted contracts have said that they wanted to take it down into the 88 or 85 range, just to max, to reduce the size of the project and therefore the parking.
Or not based on geophysical constraints, it's just what they wanted to do, what made sense for them in that location.
I'm sorry, Mr. Matson, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, so the people who proposed, at least informally, to build out to less than the maximum permitted under the current site plan did so just because that's how they like to build versus they see some geological or geophysical constraints. It's just their choice.
I think the parking has always affected people's interest, and once they reach the magic number on parking, that kind of dictates the number of units in their mind.
That's what I'm getting to. I'm wondering if the site plan is oversized. I'm not telling you, I'm wondering, I'm asking. Maybe you need a lesser density for a new site plan, which parenthetically would decrease the.
The only thing, Mr. Matson, I cannot say we could not build out at the 104.
Very honest. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, but just to follow up on that, Mr. Kinney, just to make sure. So if they decided to reduce the density, you would go back and modify the site plan?
Almost everybody who submitted a contract has had some suggested modifications to the site plan.
Okay.
But they're each builder has their own way of doing things and amenities they want to put in, or how many parking spaces per unit, and just the size of the unit. So almost everybody has suggested they would go back to the board either for a minor or major amendment. It's varied.
Right. I think that would be helpful if that was done, but okay. Mr. Lawson, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, John, on this site, can you blast the rock, or do you have to do it in some other manner?
This is not my area of expertise. What I've been told is that yes, you can blast the rock, but it's the same thing as doing pile drillings next to an historic building. It's not something that's recommended because the nature of that building has to be protected, and people have suggested that you need to drill rather than pile, and you're going to not necessarily blast, but dig in and break it up would be the recommended way of doing it. But I don't think there's any reason you couldn't blast. It's just that the damage that it might do might be not cost effective.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Huffman.
Just another quick one. What was the thought process behind renewing the site plan through 23?
We thought that if we could get a parking reduction, that would help on the price. It does not seem to have helped on the price, but it does seem to have helped in terms of getting interest in the property. But at the figures that we've seen, the 4 million plus the 30 parking spaces, which you can value either at 60,000, which the contract did, which would add 1.8 million, or 5.8, or as we suggested in terms of valuation, the 6.3 figure.
Okay. All right.
Okay. No final questions? Okay, Mr. Bailey, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
We don't have anything further. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kinney, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Thank you. I think the issues are fairly well set forward before the board. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board members then. What's everybody think? Mr. Huffman.
I mean, we had this case last year. None of this stuff is made up. They're all real challenges that that impact this site. I've looked at this site myself. I've read the geotech report that was included in the package. They're not doing any of this stuff purely to save on taxes. They're actually trying to develop this site. And the issue is now we have a policy that says we look at site plans at the exact same price per unit, which is not really fair market value. It's just a policy for mass appraisal. So I don't look at that as something that we need to follow. Once it gets to the appeal level, we should be looking at fair market value. Just to give another example, if they decided to make these units 4-bedroom units, are they still worth $86,000 a unit? Is a 200 square foot micro unit still worth $86,000 a unit compared to a 2,200 square foot unit? The policy is very broad. When you get into issues like really small sites and site plans that were approved that probably are not feasible, we need to take consideration. So we did it last year. I'd support doing it again.
Okay. Mr. Lawson.
Yes, I had a client that also looked at it, and I barely got involved because they took what Mr. Johnson had and studied it and evaluated it. And what made them pass on it was they were very worried about dealing with the rock and the impact on the neighboring, I think it's a garden apartment project. And they just decided that there's other sites with less challenges. And so I don't know that they would have bought it at any price. So I just wanted to share that. That was the purpose of my question, asking about the blasting. I mean, this site just has such challenges. Thank you.
Right. I certainly agree that there's challenges with the site. My problem is, that we're sitting here with a site plan that's approved for one thing and lots of options to do something different. And, if they would just go and modify the site plan, I think we wouldn't have an issue. And it's not like, they don't know, they haven't known about this. This has been going on. So, I don't know. I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit, that from a standpoint of equalization, we assess everybody else that has a site plan on what the value is. No questions asked, so I don't know. What do folks think about that?
Yeah.
Mr. Metz.
Excuse me, I support that. I have sympathy here for the owner, but they've made this site plan bed and they found out through the market that it's not appropriate for this site. And I would feel uncomfortable making an exception for real circumstances and get away from the site plan into what developers suggest it's worth. And I have no reason to believe that the developers aren't legitimate and appropriate and capable. But the site plan's the site plan. And because, again, they apparently oversized it, I don't see why the owner needs to get a tax break. We've certainly seen site plans where there's nothing on the land at all, but the site plan was there. And I'm thinking of Roslyn, a bunch of sites in the past years where there's nothing there, but the value of the land, because it could be developed under site plan, is very, very significant. And we hold fast to that. And I think we should hold fast here too. And as Mary already indicated, perhaps the site plan ought to be adjusted downward, and which we created downward trend on the section as well.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Penaranda.
Thank you. Well, I agree with you, Mary. I mean, we've seen many cases throughout these years, and once the site plan is approved, that's pretty much what we look at. What can be done based on the approval. We don't really go by how many offers, what kind of offers, and what else somebody else could do it. What could they not do it? They could change it. They could not change it. It really, there's so many variables, and we are not really going to make a decision based on all the ifs. I think we have to look at it just like we've done with many cases, many site plans, what its approved for. And, you know, regardless of what steps other prospective buyers take, if they change it, then, you know, I'm sure the value will change too. So I think, you know, for purposes, like you said, for equalization, we have to treat it the same way as everybody else.
Okay, Mr. Yates?
Yeah, I saw this is a challenging one because exactly what you're saying, that there is a site plan and there's a procedure and plan for site plans. Greg makes a good argument in this too, but if this was an existing building and we came across something was brought up that says that does not meet that value, we make changes on projects, and it happens to be even if it's an existing structure, that something doesn't add up right. And that's kind of what this situation is doing. It just doesn't add up right. I don't know what to pin that number on. I agree with Jose in the fact that just because they have proposals that may or may not go through, I don't know what to put that number on, but I do see this. It is not the market value it should be because of the plan is too aggressive. Same as many existing properties. Values are based on something that's too aggressive. It's a hard one, but I don't know what to put that number.
Okay, Mr. Lawson, you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, I wanted to share, you know, my experience in the real estate development field. You all keep talking about equalization, but sites are not equal. Site plans are not equal. Every site plan is unique. That's the whole reason they exist. And as the county board weighs whether or not to approve a site plan, the county board has the right to impose conditions upon that site plan. And, you know, it could be you're going to fix the road, you're going to put a tunnel underneath Wilson Boulevard to connect the metro. And so you can't just say, well, every site plan, every unit has this value. You're comparing an apple to an orange. As far as why Mr. Johnson didn't go amend the site plan, first of all, it's enormously expensive. When you do a site plan from scratch, if you're doing a major site plan, you're talking $1 million. That's just the complexity of real estate development in today's world. You all may or may not have seen that I'm doing a site plan for a duplex, and there's been a whole bunch of pushback and comments by the public that it's crazy to put a duplex through the site plan process. The other reason why Mr. Johnson can't go amend the site plan is he can't predict what the ultimate owner of the property is going to want to build. And when I have represented sellers that want to sell property, I never tell them go get a site plan approved, because when you do that, you're going to make assumptions that the builders aren't going to agree with. You'll have one builder that says you must have 2 parking spots per unit. The next builder says, no, you don't need that. You only need 1. But there's always going to be changes. The reason the site plan got approved in the first place is they wanted to understand how can this property be developed, because they were being encouraged for a number of reasons to preserve those garden apartments. And so in order to make sure this was an economic thing they could live with, they got the site plan approved. And when you do the site plans, you don't necessarily always have geotechnical reports on how you're going to actually excavate to put in that parking garage. These steps come later when you turn your attention to the engineering site plan. So I think that the board is trying to equalize what's unequalizable. And, you know, my own opinion, I would go to where the applicant wants to be.
Okay, I will just, on that, I don't think anybody's trying to equalize this with another site plan, but the general policy of the county has been, and we've accepted that, as well as the court has accepted that if the site plan is approved, it's assessed on the site plan. So yes, all of the things you said are true, but those things are also true on all the other folks that have site plans. So I'm not sympathetic to that. I mean, I think, again, I don't feel comfortable just going in there and saying, oh, I'm going to reduce it because of now we know this one piece, because now we're reducing it on this one and on other ones we have not. So, I mean, that's my thought on that. Mr. Penaranda?
Yes, Barnes, I think you're kind of mixing a little bit. I mean, we're equalizing the process,
Right.
as a board, we have to equalize properties the way they are. Not necessarily that we're equalizing all site plans the same way, because we know all are different. They all apply for different purposes. They all apply for different sizes and densities, and there's so many variables. So we're not equalizing the parcels, we're equalizing how we treat properties as far as what the value we apply to. So the equalization is not on the property itself, what is the site plan approved for, but how we are treating them based on the status of the property. If they have a site approval, then that's what we base on.
Right. Mr. Yates?
I understand, Jose, that it is that equalization of the site plan, but if it also goes to market value, and if the market value doesn't say that it's correct, then we have to consider that. And if it was an existing building and other buildings went around it, blocking view, or traffic patterns changed, or something, that even though that building has a value, new information changed what it could be sold for, then we take that in consideration. And I think that's the same thing we need to do here. The more I hear the argument, the more it does need to change, because it's just not worth what's being projected. It can't be built the way it's being projected at a reasonable price.
Right, but I would argue there, you don't know whether people are saying they can't do it. That doesn't mean it won't be done. I think it leans towards it, but we don't know. And like I said, until something is actually built there. But if it can't be done, then I get that there's cost, to modifying it, but, there's cost to paying on an original site plan that didn't, that doesn't pan out. It's kind of, I don't know. But I think go ahead, Mr. Matskin, the final comment.
Yeah, I'll just a quick analogy that I was thinking of. I was very, very appreciative of Mark's comments, but this is not unlike many apartment multifamily owners saying, oh, we're not going to lease up in a year. You only give us credit for a year. It's going to take 2. How do they know that? We only go a year at a time. We only go because there's too many variables. In this case, no, it can't be built out to full site plan specs. Well, maybe it can. Nobody really knows that. And we can't guess, and we can only go to what the approval is. If the approval changes, the assessment will change. But we only know what we know in the present.
Right. Okay, I believe we appear to be split here. So, and with 6 of us on a tie, it's going to revert to the county. So, would somebody like to make a motion? Okay, Mr. Hoffman. Turn your microphone on, sir.
Sorry about that. The rationale which carried last year was to do the county policy approved 10% reduction for site difficulties in the 86,000, which means it's 77,400 per unit. Which would bring RPC 17,005 to 8,049,600, which would be the same as last year's assessment, which we approved as a board. So that's my motion.
Okay, we have a motion.
A second.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor?
Aye.
Ken, you are in favor? All right, and opposed?
That I am. I wasn't just an arbitrary figure. It was not.
Okay, so it's 4-2 without Jose and myself. The assessment is reduced to 8,049,600 based on last year's 10% reduction. Thank you, Mr. Kinney.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have Ms. Roskin?
Mary,
She's here.
I'm sorry. For clarification, that is only the reduction on parcel 17017005, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So the total assessment for the EU is 18,496,400.
I haven't done the math, but if that's, does it, Mr. Hoffman, does that total?
Yeah.
Okay,
All right, thank
Yes.
you.
okay. All right, so we have Ms. Roskin, and then do we have Kuchin Powell?
Present.
Are you on just by phone, or are you here with us?
I'm on video.
I don't see you. Oh, there you are. There, perfect. All right, thank you. Okay, the second case on the agenda is Economic Unit 340-6716G at 3600 South Glebe Road. We've received a letter authorizing Kuchin Powell to represent the owners on this. So Mr. Powell, you can go ahead with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
I appreciate it. Thank you. As you'll see on page 1, I just want to point out a reminder. I mean, this board did hear an appeal of this and reduce an assessment on this property last year. As a reminder, we're talking about the retail component at the base of the property you see in the picture on page 1. Right. So this is related to the retail market square there. The main thing that sort of jumped out to us in our review this year, our bright sounding alarm and red flag, was this. Last year, you saw fit to reduce the assessment significantly down to roughly $27.7 million, with the effective value date of January 1st of 20. And of course, when we see the assessment rise, to 28.9 roughly this year, the alarms went off, because we're talking about a valuation date in the midst of COVID, in the midst of pandemic and all the struggles that are associated with retail and so forth, with that 1/1/21 value date. So we have to now take that into account. We certainly wouldn't have anticipated any assessment for that retail to have risen. We would have expected it to stay flat or significantly drop with those type implications. The greater risk out there within the retail marketplace. So that was our first red flag. If I took you to page 2 of our submission, you can see on the bottom left a summary of some of the values we considered, but just so you understand what I'm talking about, the trending assessment for 20, you can see the 20 and then 21 jumping up. Our indicated value that we are requesting here today is $23.8 million. Per the offering memorandum that you see that listed as 2021 value here on this page 2, it lists a value of $22.5 million. They're trying to sell the property. They're trying unsuccessfully. They've been trying to sell this property, in fact, since 2018. At that point in time, the highest acceptable bid they got was a $25 million bid. Right? You can see that documented. I won't make you go through every page, but it's documented on the letter of intent for that $25 million offer price on page 45 of our submission. They got some additional bids in 2019, the highest of which was $26.5 million. You can see that documented from the client on page 44 of our submission. Now that's height of market, 28 and 29, and they're getting bids at 25, 26, $26.5 million on the high end. They're willing to accept an offer for $25 million at height of market, and then COVID hits. And now we're expected to believe that the value is several million higher than that. And so once again, you can see it didn't pass the basic smell test for us. And that's where we arrived at. We utilized county guidelines and arrived at an indicated value of $23,773,700. We rounded it up to our requested value of $23.8 million today. If I take you to page 3 of our submission, I'll walk through how that's calculated. But I want to point out, when you see on that, we've highlighted for you the significant differences between our analysis and the assessors. And you can see there are but two, right? Vacancy and collection, and the cap rate being utilized, right? The overall rate. And it's driven entirely by, of course, the base cap rate. So vacancy and collection we knew was significantly off within the assessor analysis at 4%, because we knew actual vacancy alone exceeded 5.5% before we even factored in collection loss or any additional risk or any impending vacancies that are about to incur during this calendar year, right? To start the year, it was already at 5.5, just pure vacancy before collection issue. And they have two tenants whose leases are known to terminate this year, within a month or so of now, right? So they have that additional uptick in vacancy looming, and it's going to be hard to fill that for small retail spaces in this market where retail is struggling. And so we think certainly a vacancy and collection uptick is warranted, and certainly we considered it within our analysis. And then also, then I get to the second point of contention. The other significant difference is that base cap rate. We highlight the overall rate for you, but it's really the base. And the assessor is using a 6.1 and change base rate, whereas we're using a 7.3. And that's a significant difference. And we don't believe that the 6.1 rate is reflective of the risk of the current retail market. And to support that, we have a couple of different sources. But if you go to page 5 of the analysis, for an example, you can start to see various surveys. On page 5, for an example, you'll see we circled it in red for you to make it a little easier to get through all those numbers. But they're showing a range between 7.8 and 8.2 for a base cap rate for retail such as this, right? If you went to, that's for first tier. If you considered this second tier on the subsequent page, page 6, you know, that range goes up from 8.1 to 8.8 for a base cap rate. That's a pretty significant difference. On page 30 of our submission, you can see that the client actually, and this is in a valuation report the client commissioned, CBRE came in and said their indicated ranges for cap rates for the subject property are between 8 and 9. And you can see that again on page 30, right? So I think once you start to factor in all of these, you start to realize that something, you know, just was a bit off, was a bit of a miss with the initial assessment. And we understand some of the limitations placed upon the assessor with the model that they're working within. But I think certainly it's critically important that we factor in, you know, where you found this value to be last year as of 1/1/20, and recognize that in a COVID world, retail values are not, you know, moving up. You know, they're flat and trending down with the added risk that must be reflected in potential vacancy, that must be reflected in potential cap rate changes via the risk factor to those cap rates as well. Those changes alone, you know, drive a significant difference, and that's the basis of our case.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Roskin for the county.
Thank you, board. So, first of all, I just want to remind you this is a commercial condo. However, because of its substantial size and its singular ownership, instead of using the commercial condo guidelines, which the cap rate for that one was 6.55, we actually used the general commercial guidelines, and so the cap rate for that was 7.3%. But I want to direct your attention to the summary page. And looking at the summary page, we ran a test because after some discussion with the agent, Sean Escow, that there was an abatement that was made. So I wanted to make sure that we, because when I first looked at the January 1 assessment and compared it to the 2020 INE, I was like, oh, this is simple. But I wanted to run a test and make sure that we had considered any abatements. And so we did. And if you wanted to see the only abatement that was given for the year 2020, it was on the rent roll analysis. And it was also mentioned in the email correspondence that went back and forth between Sean and I. So only one tenant received a COVID abatement, and everyone else paid their rent. You have a, yes, I understand this area, they experience visibility, but that's going to show in their rents. Back to, so the test, we gave a discount of 20 cents per square foot for the COVID abatement, and that's what you're showing in column F that we tested. But when you go back and look at column D, which is the original assessment, it may have increased from last year, a decision that the board made. But when you take a look at column D, I took into consideration COVID. Now, if you want to compare it to the 2020 INE, take a look at your EGI. Okay, the our EGI is a lot less. It's 100,000 plus less than what they reported for 2020. You go down to the NOI, it's 100,000 less than what they reported for 2020. And once again, only one tenant received an abatement. Everyone else paid their rent. So we believe that our original assessment and the NOI is well supported. That is all. Oh, I do want to mention that I took a look at the vacancy, and there was a note that was made on the in the comments section on the summary page, and I had put down that it was 13.3% vacant. That's actually 13.3% of the small retail tenants. That does not include the grocer, okay, when I put that calculation in there. If you want to look at, and this is based on square footage, if you want to look at the overall vacancy, when you include the grocer, it comes out to 5.5%. And then you compare it to their financial vacancy that they're reporting at 6%. But even though they're reporting a higher vacancy than what we used for stabilized vacancy, once again, I want to draw your attention to our EGI and our NOI is still 100,000 less than what they're reporting for the 2020 operating year. That's all I have to add for this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Metzgen.
For the department, can you tell me what the cap rate was for this specific economic unit for last year?
Yes, it should be, I believe it was 7%, but if you give me a moment, you want to ask another question?
It was 7%, like you said, Lori.
Okay.
Okay, so it's increased. I assume, is that sensitive to COVID risks, COVID-related risks that it increased?
Yes, we looked at publications. So our cap rates are based on sales, but last year we didn't have an adequate number of sales, so we referred to publications. And publications showed overall a 30 basis point increase. And so we followed suit. We increased the cap rate 30 basis points because of that.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Lawson.
Yes, this is for the applicant. You said that two tenants are leaving next year. Is that correct?
This year, I believe.
Okay, and which tenants was that?
That is, I want to say Paisano's Pizza, and the second one I need to check on. I'll have to look for the rent roll here for you. I believe one is Paisano's. Most of the others are day spa, dental, childcare, relatively high risk in this, massage therapy, It could be the dental as well, but let me dig for that for you.
Okay.
I know one is the pizza parlor.
Okay, Mr. Yates.
Just real quick to the county, you did say the actual vacancy, including the grocery, was 5.5?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard.
All right. No further questions. Ms. Ruskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Okay, thank you. Once again, when we valued this property, it wasn't meant to increase anything over any decisions that were made last year. We took a look at all we had was the 2019, and obviously our NOI is less than 2019, and we also considered that there may be some problems due to COVID. So now that we have the 2020 income and expense statement, the county believes that our assessment is adequate. It's reasonable because the NOI is showing 100,000 less than what they are reporting. And we just recommend that the board confirm the January 1 assessment of $28,885,300. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, quick. There is one tenant scheduled to have their lease expire this year. That's Paisano's Pizza. Also, that's listed on page 100 of the appellate's packet. No other lease expires until 2023, and that's from the rent roll.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Powell, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've pretty much covered this in our case in chief. I think that, I would caution, I believe when we're comparing the base cap rate, or even the loaded cap rate that the assessor used, it's notable that when you're comparing that 7 to the 7.3, I don't believe that's reflective of 7 that is used to arrive at the board's decision last year, which was a significant reduction from what the value that the assessor assigned. So I would caution that we make sure we're not comparing apples and oranges there. But also we still, stand by the critical fact that in this diminished market, there is a significant change to the risk profile for property like this, with massages, with a hair and day spa, with a pizza parlor, with childcare. I mean, we know the nature of these type small retail spots and how risky they are right now. Talking about Paisano's, Yvonne Hair Spa expired in 2020. Paisano's is expired in 21, right? And CNS, the dental I mentioned, expires in 22. But there's a lot of risk of more of these falling off as well. So I think it needs to be reflected in the cap, and that's the end of our argument.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among the board. I mean, I'll start on this. I think the appellant made a lot of great arguments, but those are really arguments for 2022. I think based on the numbers that we have, I think the original assessment, obviously once we see the 2020 numbers, is slightly low. So I'm fine with the original assessment, based on, the performance. And I mean, it's lower than 18 and 19, and then come to find out once we get 2020, it was lower than that as well. So if that is in fact that we're going to lose the pizza, and or anything else, that'll be reflected next year, and then we'll see it next year. But so I don't have any reason to lower it, but interested in what other folks have to say. Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, once again, Mary, I agree with you. I think, and I'm with the county in this case. I don't think it's necessarily just reasonable. I think it's more just reasonable and also generous. Mm-hmm. I think the numbers are reflecting, like Ms. Ruskin said, looking at all three numbers, GPI, EGI, NOI, I think it's more generous than we've seen in many cases. So I'm okay with the county, with the original assessment.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Hoffman.
I mean, I think to me, the biggest risk to this property is not that Paisano's is going to leave next year or this year. It's more the 6 or 7 years down the road that Harris Teeter decides to leave. And so that there's still quite a bit of term left. I don't really think we need to make an adjustment this year based on that. But it might be something to look at as you get closer to that kind of impending event, where they're standing relative to the market for grocery space, what kind of concessions would need to be provided to retain them. That those types of things might be carry a lot of weight, at least with me. But this year, I mean, you still got 6 years of term with Teeter. So I think I'm okay with the assessment.
Okay. Mr. Yates?
I'm fine with it. I thought the county's logic, and given the history and even then looking at 2020, it's very well.
Okay. Anything different, Mr. Lawson?
No, ma'am. I'm okay with the county, although I will say that I don't think we're done losing tenants, because I noticed one that went out just the other day walking down Fairfax Drive, but I'm okay with the assessment.
And again, that'll be for next year. So, okay. The only thing I do see the discrepancy of the front page says it ends in 400 and the second, or the grid says it ends in 300. So.
Yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to also point out, Mary, because the data sheet, the assessment data sheet shows 300 at the end instead of 400. So I forgot to ask the county, but I think we need to clarify it for them.
Yeah, Ms. Ruskin, which is it?
400 is pulled from the web page, and that's what they're being assessed on, is 400. Please keep in mind that Excel sheets, they're rounding.
Okay.
They can go off by $100, which is, minuscule.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Then I'm going to move to confirm the county at $28,885,400. Do I have a second? Okay. Mr. Matzkin is a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. It's unanimous. The county's confirmed at $28,885,400. Thank you.
Thank you, board.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Okay, do we have Mr. Chikas?
We do.
Mr. Chikas and Mr. Warren. There we have.
Hello.
Okay. All right, perfect. Then moving along to the third case on the agenda, RPC 140450008 at 901 North Randolph Street. We have Mr. Blake Warren here for the owners. And Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you very much. I'd like to direct the board to page 48 of 136 of our submitted appeal package. This is the Randolph Towers apartment located at 901 North Randolph Street. It's consistent of one tax RPC. It was originally assessed for 2021 at $197,234,800, which is $387,000 a unit. The county is currently recommending a value of $186,599,200 following our appeal previously and the recommendation to the board. This is an older high-rise apartment building. It was originally built in 1986. It's 509 total units and 21 stories high. This is a property that we've brought before the board a number of years previously, and the issues are consistent over that time, and you'll see that as we look on page 3, which is the mixed use income and expense summary for this subject property. The main issues here with regards to even the county's revision has to do with the vacancy at this property. This again is an older property. It has been going through some ongoing renovations, unit modernization over the last few years, and that's been mainly due to competition. They've had a high vacancy. You can see this not just last year from COVID, but that exacerbated it certainly. But if you go back and go back to 2018, the actual vacancy at the property was 12%, 13% in 2019, And then most recently in 2020, you see that it jumped to 21.5%. Now, again, there has been unit monetization ongoing with this, but again, the cause of that has been due to that there's a well above market vacancy here due to the competition in the area, and then exacerbated by COVID. I know Greg Rains with Ditmar is here, and he can go into a little bit more detail regarding the vacancy at Randolph Towers. Greg, are you on?
Yeah, Blake, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, normally the vacancy here is high just based on the competition locally, but with the lease ups, the Waycroft and a lot of the crazy concessions that they were doing, but more specifically, JSOL right behind the building was given 4 to 5 months if you added up everything, so that there was an exodus based on one new competition locally and COVID. And so, the modernization of the units, we haven't pushed any vacancy to get those units. That was just natural turnover. And honestly, if we don't modernize the units, then we're going to have a different conversation just about achieving any rent. So, it would be the same story. But, yeah, the COVID and the direct competition next door with JSOL and the Waycroft really drove the vacancy.
This is Jeremy Chitlick. We mentioned this last year at the hearing, and we're basically told, well, let's see it. That's a discussion for next year, and here we are next year, and we've seen it dramatically. The county originally used income of just over 11 million, and then we provided income just under 10 million, and they revised theirs to 10.4. So we've been telling them it's coming. It came, it's here, and now we're going to tell you that in 2021 the numbers are going to look worse than they do in 20, which of course we'll say we'll hit that next year, but we'll get it next year is here, and it's time, and the numbers are showing that and supporting that. So I'll kick it back to Blake with the time we have left.
Again, with regard to the vacancy, the county goes by their high-rise guidelines. They're using 5%. We're showing that for the last 3 consecutive years, this property has operated well above 5%. It hasn't operated below essentially 12%. Dating back to 2018, and as you can see, it jumped again to 21.5% most recently in 2020. And again, that's reflective in the NOI, as Jeremy just said. We're approximately, the county's revised or recommended value, their estimated NOI is approximately $500,000 above what the property was capable of achieving most recently in 2020. The county has not given this property any consideration for that excess vacancy. They've stuck with their guidelines. So we would request that the county, the board consider the excess vacancy at the subject location. And then really the last thing is with regard to the assessment increase year over year. The original 2021 assessment, 197 million, that was actually approximately a 2% increase from the final 2020 assessment value. Now their revised value would represent a 3.6% decrease from the prior year 2020 assessment, but we don't think that goes far enough. As you can see, from 2019 to 2020, the actual NOI decrease was approximately 8%. And as Jeremy and Greg have spoke to previously, we expect that trend to continue with high vacancy as this property struggles to compete with some of the surrounding properties in the area. Jeremy, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Just at the end, we all agree that when you are voting, there's that minus 932,321 that both the county and and ourselves agree on. So when you do get to a final NOI number, capitalize that both sides, we subtract the personal property value because these are furnished at 932,321.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Warren. Good morning, Mr. Chitlick. This is Randolph Towers we're speaking of. Surmised fairly nicely by Mr. Warren and Chitlick. Again, tend to rely heavily upon the summary sheet. I believe that's page 3. Sort of echoing the comments made by the agents and the owners themselves, as echoed by emails with the agent from the owners, this is largely owner-derived vacancy. You can see that again if you look at the summary sheet in year 2017. They started these renovations in 2018, continued them in 2019, continued them last year, and in fact are doing them now. Point of fact, there's still 56 active permits. There's some 8 pages of permits for the property over the last 4 years. They admitted in last year's testimony, in fact, the emails in the packet as well, that they spent some $6 million on capital improvements over the last couple of years. That's not denied by the owner. In fact, that makes up our case. As opposed to market-derived vacancy, and again, as point of fact, right now, market-derived vacancy is near 6%. Again, by the owner's attestation, this was at least 10% increase by owner's decision not to rent out units. And again, in point of fact, we can see that the renovations are working. If you look at the growth potential, just apartment revenue from 2017 to 2020, it grew by over 2.4 million, 18%. Gross potential also grew by almost 2.4 million or 16%. This is again derived by the renovations. Again, as point of fact, the building itself in their property brochures, I think they list 20 advertised properties. Randolph Towers is the only one that they list as modernized. Again, that's just sort of to reinforce the fact that we recognize this was a management owner-derived decision to not allow full potential rent to be achieved. That has been seen in the increase year over year over year. But as point of fact, I think Mr. Warren made some claim that the county has not recognized this large increase in vacancy. Our growth potential for the 2020 revision is almost $2.5 million lower than what was achieved last year. $2.5 million lower than what was achieved, over 15% lower than what was achieved in the pandemic year. So I would beg to differ. We're very much in recognition of the vacancy, but as the board knows, using 5% guideline vacancy forced our hand to squash the potential gross to come up with a effective gross, which is much more in line with the last 4 years. Again, operating expenses very much in line with the last 3 years. They've gone down 3 years in a row, but again, that makes sense in a property that's vacancy has increased 3 years in a row. And again, we did note that the net operating income dropped, but again, that's due to owner decision to not allow vacant units to come to market. As opposed to compare it to a new property, I think for it to be apples to apples, you have to have your full lineup of units available to rent, especially now that they're fully modernized. Again, you can see, as Mr. Warren noted, we did in fact recognize the drop in effective gross. Our year-over-year revision reflects a 3.7% drop, which we think is much more in line with the last 3 years of stabilized history. The appellants, again, are looking for over a 12% drop year over year. It's just too aggressive. It's essentially looking for a drop even from last year, which was the lowest that's been reported over the last 4 years. The last 3 years. But again, this is attributable solely to vacancy decisions made by the owner. And you can see that in recognition of the gross potential income going up 4 years in a row, even though the effective gross dropped this year, again, due to the increase in vacancy. Based upon the revision, based upon the property's location, noted it's half a mile to Virginia Square Metro, it's a half a mile to Ballston Metro, it's a block from Ballston Quarter, it's 2 blocks from Central Library and Quincy Park. It's well located, it's well amenitized, it's been modernized by the owners and the owners' attestation. We do believe that the revision reflects the increase in owner-mandated vacancy, and we do believe that the revision of $186,599,200 should be confirmed. Anything to add, Irving?
No.
That'll be it. We're available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Yates.
I'll start to the appellant. what percentage of the building has been renovated? That's expected to continue.
So we'll be done this summer. So, I think we have about 80 units left to complete. It could be slightly higher or lower, but so around 400 have been done.
As of
So the
today.
building
As
will
of
be
today,
done this summer.
yeah, as of today, right? Not as of the end of last year. The end of last year was different. At the end of last year, we were probably in the 300 range.
Okay, Mr. Metzger.
It's for the department, and it turns out that it's directly related to the first question. I know this building real well, and the owner has spent a great deal of money reskinning the exterior. It's a big building, so it's real money. And as we've gone over several times, they're spending a good amount of money refurbishing, updating the interior. But I see that the effective age is only 1985. I mean, it's a question just has to be asked, although I assume I know the answer. You've taken all these factors into account, and the professional assessment is it's only increased in effective age by 20 years, given where they've done, the owner's done through 1/1/21. Is that right? You
No,
took a
sir.
long look at
Yeah,
the
so
effective age, which affects the cap rate, of course.
exactly. Yeah, I think that the best answer is, again, it's unfortunate just with the manpower we have devoted to the finishing of these records. I have not personally been out to that property to verify the work that's been done over the last 4 years. At that point, there may be an effective year change, but again, usually that'd be something that we do. We do a property tour and try to make sure that we look at more than just bathroom skin finishes, or as you're saying, exterior, pressure washing work or brickwork, whatever. We'd want to do a more thorough sort of walkthrough. But as of now, the work they've done in the last 4 years is not reflected in that effective age.
Not. Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Sheikis, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, ma'am. Again, not to beat a dead horse, we're all in agreement that this property's been modernized as we speak. It has been over the last 2 years. Again, we believe that we have reflected that large increase in owner-mandated vacancy. Again, our gross potential revision is over $1.6 million lower than what was achieved in last year. Again, in a COVID year, our revision is 3.7% reduction from last year, more in line with what's going on at the property. The 12% indicated by the appellant is just too aggressive. We do believe that the $186,599,200 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes. Again, as we've previously stated, the revised column in the county's response memo is recommending an NOI. It's approximately $500,000 above what this property actually reported. As the owner has detailed, this property is experiencing a downward trend in terms of vacancy due to competition exacerbated by COVID, and that trend is expected to continue into the future. I think it's important to note too that these aren't, forced vacancies. They're not kicking people out of these units to modernize them. It's as they become available. Again, those vacancies have been caused due to some of the recent supply and new supply that's out there in the market, and due to the competition. So I think, again, when the county is just using a 5% market vacancy, and we're showing vacancy year over year for the last several years, it's been well in excess of that. We don't think it's been given enough consideration.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Very close friend of mine lives here, and so I asked her about the 23% vacancy, and what she told me was that this building was full of young single people, And when COVID came, she said there was a mass exodus of the young single people. They went home to, stay with their folks or went back home wherever they're from, and they were able to work via Zoom. And so it's not really, I mean, it's partly self-imposed, but partly due to COVID. And so she said management took that opportunity to go ahead and accelerate their renovation program. So what I did, and I'll see if anyone agrees with this, I took the department's revision, and they have vacancy of 5%. I went back to 2017 to try to get a more standard fair vacancy number. And I took the 6% instead of the 5%. I did a whole bunch of math, and I hope I did it right. And by increasing the vacancy by that 1%, I ended up at 184, 114, 600. And, I know that they are going through the renovation, but the extreme vacancy is partially caused by trying to catch up with competition and partially caused by the COVID. So, in my mind, the 184, 114, 600 is more fair, and I'll see if anyone agrees with that.
Okay, I'll jump in behind you. I listened to both sides, and I think both sides had some very good points. I would certainly agree that the 4% reduction was warranted. I don't think the 12%, I think the 12% was a little bit high. But I look at this and I think the appellant's argument of, almost $500,000 worth of income being capitalized that wasn't achieved is a good one. And we do assess on an annual basis. It's actually 472,000, but, close enough to call it 500. That equates to 8.6 million. That's a pretty significant amount of money. That does give me a little angst. What I did is I took the actual appellant's numbers and used the county cap rate, and it ends up being an 8% drop, which is really pretty much in the middle of, where the two of them are at 178,869,600. But that's, it is a significant drop. I don't know what other people think about that, but I think.
Can you repeat that last rationale?
I took the appellant's numbers, which are in line with what it actually reported in 2020, and not, nearly $500,000 higher, and capped out each portion, the apartment and the retail, with the county's cap rates, and it combines at 178,869, 600. And, I look at this and think, this year is going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The appellant is saying, oh, it's going to still carry over into next year. I don't know. We've read things that have said that, especially this market, the rents have come back and have surpassed pre-COVID numbers. So I don't know what this building is going to show. But I think for this year, since we do assess it every year, I don't have a problem with that. But I'm curious. I see Mr. Penaranda was doing some numbers. I'm sure he's got a third number to, consider. So, Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, well, my number comes between both, and I'm actually pretty much, I agree with Barnes. I think the 6% vacancy, that's the same thing I did. I applied the 6% vacancy, but just to the apartments.
Mm-hmm.
And doing the numbers, I do come up with a lower number that Barnes came up because I'm just reducing the vacancy. I'm increasing the vacancy just on the apartments,
Mm-hmm.
which brings me to an EGI of 12.7 approximately, and I'm using the same rate of expenses. So the NOI that I come up with is 9,531,537. That's just the apartments. At the same cap rate, the value for the apartments would be 171,122,747. And then if we add the retail, 10,780,400, the total value would be 181,903,147.
181,903,137.
147.
147. Okay.
But yeah, I'm using the same rationale that Barnes is using, except that I'm just using it on the apartment side.
Well, I would lean more towards yours because you know, I did feel like the 8% drop was a lot on mine, but with the absence of anything else, I would have gone there, but I can get behind that. Mr. Hoffman, you had your hand?
Yeah, I got something close to you, Mary, and actually in between you and Jose, and I like the Barnes Jose rationale, so I'm going to go with Jose.
All right.
All right.
All right, Mr. Penaranda, go ahead.
I'll move that we reduce the assessment on this parcel to 181,903,100 based on increasing the vacancy on the apartment side to 6%.
Okay, and we have Mr. Metzgen as a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that again is unanimous. It's reduced to 181,903,100, and that is based on increasing the vacancy on the apartments to 6%.
Mary, just a quick point of clarification. Was the personal property removed?
That's
from that
reduced afterwards. So we're just doing the tax assessment.
We'll make sure, Jeremy.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it gets taken off, but that has nothing to do with us.
Okay. Okay. If Chris said, okay, thanks.
He'll take care of it.
Thank you, board members.
All right, thank you. I have been asked to take a break by one of the board members, so it's 10:16. So if we take 5 minutes and come back at 10:21, we can wrap up the last two fairly quickly. So if you turn off your microphones and your cameras during the 5-minute break, we will see everybody back.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks, Mr. Warren.
Thanks. Bye.
And she Okay, well, we're waiting for Mr. Matzkin and Mr. Hoffman. Is Ms. Roskin back on?
Yes, I am.
There you are, okay. And then Ms. Borman and Mr. Harmon?
I'm here.
There's one. Thank you. Oh, we got everybody there. Okay, well, just give Mr. Metzkin one more minute. And there he is. Okay. Returning to the agenda, the fourth case on the agenda is Economic Unit 3500384G at 575 South 12th Road. It's my understanding that you both have agreed last night to a value, both parties?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's the economic unit, the 10,285,100?
You mean the number that we agreed to?
Yes.
No, the revised number that we agreed to was 8,508,400.
One more time, can you say that?
8,508,400.
Okay, and the appellant has agreed to that? Okay. All right, then I will move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Matzkin, all in favor of accepting the withdrawal? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Withdrawal is accepted. Okay, and thank you, Ms. Roskin. And then we'll move Mr. Chikas back up here.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, board.
Thank you, Lori. Have a good day.
All right, and so the last, there we go. Okay, the last case on the agenda is RPC 29014-184 on South Arlington Mill Drive. So Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, so this is the Hilton Garden Inn, Shirlington. And first off, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, Mr. Chikas, good morning. As I said, this is the Hilton Garden Inn, Shirlington. It was built in 2009. So we've viewed prior board hearings for hospitality hotel properties, and we understand the methodology the county has used. While we don't agree with the methodology and believe that it results in assessments in excess of fair market value, we have adopted our case to reflect the manner in which the board has viewed these properties prior. In this case, if you would be so kind as to direct your attention to page 3 of the appeal packet, you'll see the reconstructed assessment. If you turn to page 4, you'll see that there are 143 rooms at this property and that the county used $138 per available room night, which multiplied by 365 days gets us the assessed room revenue. If we are seeking a revenue per the methodology in between the 2018 and 2019 levels, which is my understanding based on the prior hearings, then we assume occupancy based on the average of the 2018-2019 years also. This was 80% occupied in 2018 and 82% in 2019 for an average of 81% occupancy. If we assume 81% occupancy, the RevPAR on the reconstructed assessment is $170.37. And this also is between the actual 2018 and 2019 RevPAR. However, at 81% occupancy, we believe the operating history of the property indicates that the operating expenses are not going to be the assessed $4,960,499. If you would direct your attention back to page 3, please note the operating expenses were $5,150,453 in 2019 and $4,798,927 in 2018. In order to get to that RevPAR at 81% occupancy assumed by the assessment, the operating expenses are not going to be the same or in between where they were in 2018-2019. As of the date of value, the expenses will have increased due to the increased cost of labor and materials, especially given the supply issues caused by the pandemic and witnessed by all parties throughout the 2020 calendar year. We believe the operating expenses should be adjusted in the test column to at a minimum the 2019 level and likely higher to account for increased cost experienced at the property. Keeping the county's test column assumptions, but adjusting the operating expenses to the 2019 level results in a value of $18,959,600. That's our case in chief, and thank you. Eileen, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. This is, in fact, I've lost count of how many hotels we've heard this year. You've heard a number of them. Far and wide, you've been in agreement with the county's valuation of these. As we've explained in previous cases, we did look at the previous years. Again, prior to January 1, the thinking was that this may be a 2-year turnaround, which is, I believe, the thinking behind Mr. Harmon's notation of revenue somewhere in between 2018 and 2019. We did offer revision reflecting that. I believe Mr. Harmon misspoke a little bit in the sense that if you were to take the average of 2018 and 2019, you would in fact get a RevPAR of $138. I think he was quoting the ADR, average daily rate, which would have been in that area of $170 or so per room. Regardless, this really boils down to the summary sheets and really even more so to columns I and J. It's the revision made by the county versus the appellant's opinion of value. We're both fairly close in regards to net operating income. I think it's about $30,000 difference. We are a little bit lower. Again, reflecting more in line with the 2018 and a half, if you will, year 2019, as opposed to what they did achieve in 2019. This board is familiar. We did make a below the line adjustment of 65% of revenue. This again is in line with every other select service property and full service property that we've seen in the county. And this resulted in a year-over-year reduction of 32%, bold, but still warranted with what happened in the 2020 year. The appellants have made an adjustment of over 145% of the achievable income. So it's just too big of a bite, as I've said previous, that led to a year-over-year reduction of over 52%. I just don't believe even the owner themselves would be willing to sell the property for the value attested to opined by the representative for the owner. That being said, and again, in accordance with what we've done on all the other properties in the county, full service and select service, that being said, a negative 65 adjustment of total revenue. We do believe that the county's revision of $21,070,100 should be confirmed as fair and equitable. Anything to add, Irving?
I don't have anything to add.
That'll be all for the county. If we have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I didn't catch it. What figure is the applicant looking for?
Is that to the county, sir?
No, to the applicant. You had said 18 something.
Yes, sir, that's correct. So based on prior hearings and seeing the methodology accepted by the board, we did deviate from the pro forma figure listed in column J on the test page. Right. And what we did was we took the county's revised assessment in column.
No, how much was it? I couldn't hear.
Yes, sir. $18,959,600.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Matzkin?
I would like to hear the appellant's description as he was starting on how it goes up that $4.5 million. What is it you adjusted based on what you've seen the board do over time this year?
So what we've seen, we accepted the revised assessment column with the exception of the expenses. So with the assessment date of January 1st, 2021, and the assessment being presumed correct, what we're basically arguing is there's no way of achieving that revenue with that same expense level. That revenue is basically reflective of a level in between 2018, 2019 occupancy. And at that occupancy, you would have expenses that have grown since that time. So while revenues may be, assuming they're there, the expenses will have grown from 2018, 2019 levels. There's no way to achieve that revenue without higher expenses as of the date of value.
So what is your substitute operating expenses in column J?
We believe at a minimum, the column E reconstructed I&E operating expenses of $5,150,453 should be used. And even that may be low. That could ostensibly be raised to account for inflation over the course of 2020. So, at a minimum, that $5,150,453, possibly grow that by 3% to account for another year of inflation in expenses.
I'm sorry, that's the number you have at 5 million plus in column J and column E. So that's unchanged, but in column J, your bottom line is 14 million point 8 or so. And now you're upping it 4 million or so, but the operating expenses is unchanged in that same column. So something else must change to get the 14 million up. Or do I miss something?
So we have taken a new approach given the further understanding that we have gained of the methodology. We're now looking at column I, the revised assessment provided by the county, and we're proposing adjusting their expense rate in that column.
Up by about 200,000 or so.
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No, Mr. Cheekas, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, ma'am. So unfortunately, Mr. Harmon's speculation is just that. He claimed that the property can't achieve more income while also lowering expenses, but they did that in 2017 to 2018. Revenue increased by almost 180,000, and the operating expenses actually went down by about 400,000. So it's not unheard of for this to happen. And again, ours is much more in line with what was actually achieved in 18 and 19. If you take the average of what was reported in 2018, column C, add it to column E, and take that average, you'll see exactly where we got a revision from. Again, our revision was 32% drop in value year over year. This is the first time we're hearing about this new value based upon by the appellant. Either way, we do believe that it's taking too big an adjustment based on 2019's actuals as opposed to a standardized look at over the last 3 years that has been actually achieved at the property. So again, based on previous decisions made by the board, based on the exact same rationale used by the county, we do believe that the revision of 21,070,100 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So column I, we're looking at stabilizing the revenue and the occupancy. At those levels, those are in between 2018, 2019. Those expenses will no longer be achievable as of January 1st, 2021. As we've all been aware over the course of 2020, there were many supply chain issues, both with labor and material. So instead of the typical, rule of thumb, 3% increase in inflation, actual prices most likely rose significantly above that. We're contending that there's no way of achieving the stabilized occupancy that's assumed by the assessment at that operating expense level. And at a minimum, it should be column I should be up to the 2019 actual expenses. Eileen, do you have anything? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among the board then. Okay, Mr. Manskin.
I'm a little tentative here. With extra cleaning and extra PPE and the sensitivity in hotels and motels, costs should go up per person, per room, per activity. But of course, there's a whole lot less rooms being let, people in the place, activity overall. I'm not sure how to this is just 2020 was an unusual year as of 1/1/21. And I don't know how you offset fewer people for more cost per person in any rational way. I could buy either of these operating expenses as reasonable. That's what I got.
Yeah, I'll jump in there as well. You know, I look at this and I'm fine with the county's revision. I look at, you know, the appellant's willing to accept that. I mean, they, you know, want slightly higher on expenses, but they also in their column also had, you know, a higher effective gross income to offset that. So, you know, I don't know. I'm fine with what the county did and think the revision is certainly a fair reduction, you know, based on what's going on in the market. Other folks? Mr. Penaranda.
I'm okay with the revised assessment also. I don't have any proposed changes.
Okay, anybody else different? All right,
No.
then I'm going to move to reduce it to the county revised number of 21,070,100. Do you have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion and a second by Mr. Penaranda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It's reduced to the county's revision of 21,070,100.
Thank you, board members.
Thank you. All right,
Thank you,
before
George.
people scoot out, that completes the agenda for today, but just so that everybody knows, on Wednesday, the 28th, and this includes Ms. Borman and Mr. Harmon, the first case has asked to withdraw, so we'll be voting on that. So you're the second, third, fourth, and fifth case, so you'll be starting. So I didn't want you to come in late because we'll be ready to move to you immediately at 9:01 on that day. So does anybody else have anything of business to talk about? County? No? Okay, then we will stand adjourned today at 10:38 and re-adjourn next Wednesday, September 29th at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, board.